Thank you so much, Madikin. So I think one of the coolest things about the SciPy conference is that it's not just Python and not just computing, but it's also scientific. And as a result, we get to see an incredible breadth of topics. Some of the most memorable keynotes for me were the ones that weren't just about what code was written, but also included a lot about what was accomplished with the code, celebrating the Sci and SciPy, truly. I think over the course of the last week, it's clear that you can accomplish quite a lot with the SciPy ecosystem. Science can be as personal as each of us hacking on code against artisanally hand-harvested data, but it can also be massive collaborations that transcend domain. Observational astronomy as a field is more than just knowing a lot about stars and requires expertise across computing, electronics, detector physics, and more. And historically, these domains were stitched together with a variety of different code flavors. And as somebody who has been personally victimized by my advisor's Fortran code, it was incredible to see Python take root in the astronomy community. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce Yusra AlSayyad. Yusra is the Deputy Associate Director of the Data Management Subsystem for the Rubin Observatory.
What do you think happened in this picture? There's a traffic signal lying in the street. Maybe a car slammed into it. Fortunately, we can rewind and watch the whole video. He was just trying to be helpful. I can relate. As the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a snapshot doesn't tell the whole story. Astronomy has given us gorgeous snapshots, informative snapshots over the years. These snapshots have been from our space telescopes above the atmosphere that blurs images as they're taken on Earth. They've been enormous snapshots. For example, the Sloan Digital Sky Survey imaged a quarter of the sky over the course of 10 years in the early 2000s. This has given us data like this. The colors represent the distances to stars, and it becomes very clear that these are remnants of the satellite galaxies that were orbiting the Milky Way when you look at it like this. And we think of the universe as changing on billions of year timescales and maybe millions of year timescales. But we have caught it changing on human timescales as well. For example, we caught this with Hubble Space Telescope binary system that experienced some kind of eruption, and it changed dramatically over the course of just 6 months. And what you're seeing here, it looks like gas expanding, but what it really is light from the explosion traveling outwards and illuminating more and more and more of the surrounding gas like a CAT scan. There have been targeted time domain surveys, like the Kepler's mission that stared at some stars to look for planets that were eclipsing. But what could we do if we had a time-lapse video of the whole sky? There are questions that we know it could answer. For example, something that's very difficult in astronomy is measuring the distances to things. Something that is bright and far away looks the same as something that is faint and close up. And one of the ways that we get distances is via so-called standard candles, objects where we know their intrinsic brightness and can use their apparent brightness to deduce a distance. The discovery of so-called dark energy in the late 90s was via a type of standard candle called type 1a supernova. By comparing the distance, and type 1a supernova are detected and identified via their light curves. They get bright really rapidly, and then they decay slowly over time. And it was detection of these type 1a supernova that showed us that if you compare the distance to these galaxies with the speed at which they're receding away from us, that the acceleration of the universe is actually expanding or accelerating. Milky Way structure, for example, a standard candle in our own neighborhood is variable stars, and they're identified via their pulsation periods. Solar system objects move over against the backdrop of static galaxies. And if you have a time-lapse video of the sky, you could detect all the asteroids down to some minimum size. And that would not only give you information on history of the solar system, but also serve as an early warning system for potentially hazardous asteroids heading towards Earth. And closer. And my favorite, so those are questions that we know a time-lapse video can answer. But what excites me the most are the questions that it would then raise. When we all started carrying around cell phones in our pockets and putting dash cams on our cars and cameras on our doorbells, we started catching rarer and rarer events, like giant meteors exploding over Russia, or insurance fraud, which no one would have believed the driver if it weren't for this video. So dramatic. And even little cute things like raccoons thinking they're being very sneaky. And all this video has enabled us to catch rarer and rarer events. And eventually, if we had the dash cam for the sky, we would start catching events that were not explained, not explainable, not seen before, and would raise more questions to be answered. Our dash cam for the sky is here, and it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce you to the Rubin Observatory today. We turned it on for the first time mid-April, just two and a half months ago. The whole thing, maybe not the whole thing, most of it was built on Python. It's operated with Python. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the data management system and things that we learned building infrastructure and operating a giant observatory with Python along the way. But first, a little bit about how it works. There are three major pieces of technology that make this possible: a very fast telescope, a giant camera, and a state-of-the-art data management system. With this telescope, we're going to constantly survey the sky over the course of 10 years. We can cover the whole sky in just 3 days, and we're going to just do it over and over and over. It's nestled high in the Andes and operates in the optical and infrared bands. When we say the telescope is fast, we mean that in the photography sense. It's very, very zoomed out, but it's also literally the fastest moving telescope in the world. And this is needed in order to slew quickly, settle quickly, and get ready for the next snapshot. We were going to take a snapshot every 30 seconds. The camera is the largest digital camera in the world. It is the size of a small car, weighs 3 tons, and the front lens is almost as tall as I am. Its detector array is made of 189 individual CCDs. Each one is 4,000 by 4,000 pixels. This means that the whole array is 3.2 gigapixels or 3,200 megapixels. And these images are approximately 20 to 25 gigs on disk. So the data gets pretty big pretty fast. This past year, we've all been in, and I'll tell you more about the data management system later. So for years, we've been building these subsystems independently, and finally, over the last year, we put it all together. In October, the mirror was coated in that big metal coating chamber that you see on the left with a thin layer of silver, which gives it its reflective properties. And then we took it up from level 3 to level 7 of the observatory. The way the the telescope achieves its wide field of view is with it doesn't just have 2 mirrors, it has 3 mirrors. And what you're seeing here is the mirror number 1 and mirror number 3 in the same piece of glass. The light comes in, reflects off of the outer mirror. There's a secondary mirror sitting on top around the camera. And then the third mirror is the circle that you see on the inside. After installing the mirror, that was the last big piece, and we declared the telescope complete and named it the Simony telescope after the original donor, one of the original donors for the glass. We had a small commissioning camera on the telescope at the time because the big camera wasn't ready yet, and we went on sky with this for 8 weeks in the fall. This helped us calibrate things like whether the telescope knows where it's pointing and focus. We collected a small amount, the camera's small, it's only 20% the size of the full camera. So we didn't collect, it's tiny data compared to LSST. But last week we did release this as a data preview 1, which I'll tell you about later. So this data is now accessible via data.lsst.cloud. And then this spring, we installed the camera. One of my coworkers was watching this video and said that she was surprised by how much it looks like an actual camera. It's even got a little lens cap on it. So this is, what you're seeing here is what we call a critical lift. If we were to drop the camera here, that would be it for the project. And we're now installing it around M2, the mirror number 2, and the clearance on both sides is like millimeters to centimeters, and so that's Brian Stalder sitting up there watching the clearance as it gets installed. And then April 15th, we turned it all on. So we've been working on this since 1998. This is Tony Tyson's original drawing of a way to achieve a telescope with a really big field of view. It's a modified Paul Baker design, and you can see that the working title at the time was the Dark Matter Telescope. This would later be renamed the LSST, and then we renamed it the Rubin Observatory a few years ago. So Rubin is named after Dr. Vera Rubin, who made the first observations of dark matter. And so now I'm very thrilled to have the honor of showing you the first images that came off the telescope. Thank you. Okay, this is just 2% of a full field of view. We can't fit a whole field of view on an image and be able to see all the detail. So we made a video, and let's just watch this. So you can see structure, large-scale structure and positions of the galaxies. The colors are not just beautiful, but they're also informative. They tell you about how far away the galaxies are. But I promised you time-lapse video. Oh, I also say you can, there's a panable, zoomable version of the whole image on skyviewer.app. I put the link at the end of the presentation as well. And whenever I'm having a bad day, I can just open this up and find some new part of the image that I hadn't seen yet, and it makes my day better. Okay, so this is a zoomed in area of about the size of a quarter of the full moon. And it has been photobombed by asteroids. So the appearance of these asteroids show you how this image was created. In order to emulate longer exposure times, we can't just take a 1 hour exposure with the telescope. So instead we take multiple shorter exposures, calibrate them to common atmospheric transparency, resample them to a common grid, and then stack them. This also shows you how the color image was made. We took images in multiple filters. So we placed filters in front of the camera, and these filters limit the light coming in to just certain wavelengths. In order to create this color image, we assigned these co-added stacked images to each of the channels, green, blue, green, red. And what you're seeing here is, for example, an asteroid moving that has been imaged multiple times for the astronomers out there, the G band, and then the R band, and then we took images with the I band. But let's look at the images individually. All these asteroids are new discoveries, like new detections by Rubin Observatory in the first week in just 1 week of observation. Because we only imaged this one region of the sky over the course of 1 week, we caught this narrow cone of asteroids. But as we run the telescope over the course of years, it'll sweep around and image more of the solar system, and we expect to discover another 5 million asteroids in just the first year or two of operation. For context, there's only 1 million known asteroids discovered to date in the 200 years since we first discovered the first asteroid. Okay, I promised to tell you more about the data management challenge. So this is the part that I work on, and there were 3 major components: camera, telescope, data management. So why wasn't the Rubin Observatory built earlier? Simply, the technology to manage the vast volume and velocity of data just simply did not exist 20 years ago. Remember, 20 years ago, we still got our Netflix DVDs in the mail. YouTube just came into existence. And the same technologies that made streaming video possible and social media possible have also made Rubin Observatory possible. Those include things like more abundant storage, more parallel compute, networks that can carry large volumes of data over long distances, and algorithms. Advancements in algorithms make it possible to not only process the images, but also interpret the data from this telescope. To put the amount of data into perspective, if each image is 25 gigs and we take 800 per night, let's see if I can make it stop flickering. It'll come back. Per night, that means that we'll produce 20 terabytes of images in just raw pixels per night. Run the telescope for a year, and that's 5 petabytes of just raw, unsigned integers. To put that into context, all the optical and infrared pixels of the sky taken to date have added up to approximately 5 petabytes, which means that in just the first year of operating this telescope, we will have doubled the number of optical and infrared pixels available to humanity. So how did we leverage state-of-the-art data management to accomplish Rubin? First, we built a long-haul network that takes data from the mountaintop in Chile to our archive data facility in SLAC in under 10 seconds. Like, imagine telling 20 years ago you that you could transmit 25 gigs in 10 seconds. There, we process the data, and then 80 hours later, send it to our archive data facilities in France at IN2P3 and the UK. These data facilities provide the petaflops that we need to process the images. We run these images through our science pipelines. The science pipelines calibrate out the effects of the atmosphere and the instrument to provide science-ready catalogs and images for scientists. We will get those data products to users in 2 different ways. First is the fast way via the nightly alert stream. Every image that comes off the telescope, we will subtract off an image of the static sky, and then find everything that moved, appeared, changed, and distribute that as an alert. 24 hours later, the full catalog of measurements on those difference images will be available, and then 80 hours later, the full images and difference images will be available. We expect up to 10 million alerts per night, which is way too many for you to be sitting there monitoring on your own. And for that reason, we rely on community brokers that will ingest and filter these alerts and then serve them to scientists. So if you're interested in type 1a supernova, you can subscribe to type 1a supernova from one of these brokers, and if you have a follow-up telescope, you can go take a follow-up spectrum of a candidate if you want. The other way we'll get data to our users is via the annual data releases. So every year, we take all the data taken to date and combine it to squeeze as much information out of it as possible. We provide calibrated brightnesses as a function of time, positions as a function of time, and this is both to support static sky science and statistical studies of variability. This data release process actually grows the data because we're providing these co-added stacks, like the one I showed you of our first image, and also all the difference images. It also provides measurements like shapes, colors of each of the objects that have been detected on them. So data releases are 10 times as big as the raw data. This means after 1 year, the first data release is 50 petabytes, and then potentially after 10 years, we're looking at up to 500 petabytes, which is way too much to fit on your laptop. It's so important not just to make your data available, but to make it accessible. So we do that via our science platform. And the science platform is essentially a laptop available to every registered user with the Rubin data attached to it. And this allows scientists to bring their code to the data instead of having to bring the data to their code. And the science platform is built on the Python data science stack, and we enthusiastically upstream to it. And this is probably, I haven't told you yet where to find us on GitHub. we go by the name of the survey, which is the LSST, rather than Rubin. And then finally, the final piece that made the data management system possible is state-of-the-art algorithms. With this amount of data, we need fast and robust algorithms to not only process the data, but to interpret the data. It's probably obvious why you need to write performant algorithms, but you also need to write robust algorithms, because as you have more and more data, you find rarer and rarer exceptions, and you only find your 1 in a million error if you take 1 million images. And so as your data grows, your code also needs to get more and more robust. Okay, so building this system did not come without its unique challenges. And I thank you for the opportunity to ask my coworkers over the last few weeks what they learned building this system. Some themes came up around what Python means to us, scalability, interfaces, abstractions, and people. And of course, not everybody agreed on everything. So first theme that came up was Python's unifying power. We adopted Python in 2005, which was early for astronomy. And thank you, Chuck, for the great talk yesterday on what the landscape looked like in 2005. AstroPy did not exist yet. We had this code called IRAF, and there was a wrapper for it already called PyRAF, but it definitely wasn't petascale. And so we embarked on writing our own science platform, our own science pipelines. We chose C++ for the number crunching. That's things like our convolutions, our image classes, our coordinate transforms, and wrapped it in Python. This was so early adoption for Python in the astronomy community. I saw a talk from Birgitta a while back showing that Python didn't really hockey stick in the astronomy community until sometime between 2010 and 2015. So this C++ Python stack, that was our definition worked for years. We used Python for the control, and we used C++ for the performance. We wrapped our C++ in Swig, which we hated. So thank you. And I'll also say, so Jim Bosch, the technical lead for the science pipelines, gave a talk here at SciPy 2013 about this C++ Python stack. So thank you to PyBind 11 for saving us. And then we noticed some years went by, and then we noticed something interesting, which was that developers were going out of their way to avoid touching the C++ layer. This is obvious in our lines of code over time. The C++ layer is pretty static in lines of code, whereas the Python lines of code is continuously increasing. And we see this somewhat as like a warning sign. When compiled code is a last resort, you're no longer using the right tool for the job. Because while Python is amazing, it doesn't do everything. If we were starting from scratch today, we would definitely still use Python for the science pipelines. We'd probably use Rust for the compiled code. We would write less compiled code ourselves, and for sure avoid any cross-package compiled code interfaces within our stack. Elsewhere in the project, the telescope control software was building their software in LabVIEW, and they were later to the Python party. They adopted Python in 2003. There was a software engineer on data management named Russell Owen who had written all the telescope control, a lot of the telescope control software for the Apache Point Observatory. And he was a big proponent of switching to Python for telescope control software, and their switch allowed him to move over from data management and write this beautiful service abstraction layer that could control the various commandable hardware components. This also had really nice side effects. For example, recently we were able to switch the messaging system at the summit from DDS to Kafka, which was more, surprisingly, like more stable, and also had more expertise around the project, because from data management especially, where we used it for our alert stream or our telemetry database. And so what Python has done for us is that it's been a huge unifier. It has unified data management and telescope and site. Even within data management, it's unified the data services folks who manage the science platform, and also the production folks who do the image processing. It's of course unified us with the astronomy community and with you, the open source software community. Okay, so at the time, because there was no tool that could already do the job, we had some big ambitions. We thought that the LSST science pipelines were going to be the image processing code that everybody used for their telescope from that day onward. And we were hoping not just to process imaging with LSST, but also with other telescopes. It was the software was camera agnostic. And like on top of that, we also like at a time envisioned us becoming what AstroPi would later become. And this ambition manifested itself in a few ways. It made us, whenever we had a choice between writing a piece of software that was like very specific to our use case or something very general, we would kind of lean too hard generally. And this worked out great for us in some respects, but in other contexts had motivated us to write code that we didn't actually end up using. And now we do have corners of the code base and interfaces that we don't actually use, but we still have to maintain. And we're like increasingly feeling crushed by the maintenance burden of this growing stack. One of the cases where an abstraction went well for us was the abstraction layer for interacting with storage. The science pipelines don't interact with the disk at all. They only interact with the butler. So the butler is a data store and a registry with pluggable backends. So registry, it is a database that holds information on what data is available where and how to access it, how to read it. And then you can ask the butler to fetch and write data to the pluggable data stores. This abstraction is what allowed us to move data facilities twice. We moved from NCSA, then to Google Cloud, and now we're at Slack, managed by Stanford. It's also what allowed other telescopes to adopt the butler. So this is now used by NASA SphereX and the Subaru telescope in Hawaii. So I will say with interfaces, there are trade-offs. Avoid the temptation to write interfaces that you won't use. I know in hindsight, this is like kind of a cheap lesson because hindsight's 20/20. Okay, so then something that we're grappling with since we've turned the telescope on is scalability. Because LSST's main contribution is more, it's like more of everything, more pixels, more observations. There were no data sets that we could test earlier. We've been doing end-to-end testing for years, but it was only in the last 5 years that we started doing scale testing. And you all know that, you do your scale testing, you find a bottleneck, and then you fix it, and then you find another bottleneck, and then you fix it, and then you find another bottleneck, and you fix it. Every optimization reveals a new bottleneck, and they don't surface until you test at scale. One story from the services layer recently is because we were about to go live with our science platform, Frosty with data services did some scale testing of the science platform to see if it could support 3,000 concurrent users. So she had simulated users accessing the system. They would run queries, get results back. It all went great, high fives all around. Then we went live, and with just 300 users, Jupyter Hub ran out of memory. So what do you think happened? So it turns out real users will launch a query and then close their laptop lid and walk away. And so what was happening was that the results were piling up and piling up, and then it would crash. So this has since been fixed, but the lesson here is that scalability isn't just about increasing your volume, but also about getting the right behavior with your scale tests. You want to debug the world as it is and not as your tests simulated. Not the world your test simulated. And then finally, a theme that came up over and over was, of course, the people. I'll just quote KT directly. Scientific computing has always needed to be a collaboration between those who know the science and those who know software engineering. Unfortunately, it's still rare to have high levels of both in one person. We should continue to work to remedy that and foster interchange in the meantime. And I think Rubin has been particularly good about this. If you identify as both a software engineer and scientist, and you are feeling pressured to choose one or the other, don't. Knowing both is your superpower and will enable you to do great things and enable great science. Writing software for scientific infrastructure is not necessarily glamorous. On the scale of being a PI that funds a new project, or being a theorist that is where you're the first person to be able to explain or predict something new, there's not a lot of glory in enabling science for others, but it is so important, and I truly believe that it is our species' superpower to be able to cooperate to build these really, really impressive things. So find some friends, find a mission that you believe in, and go build something. And if you prefer to work alone, we have data for that. Because Rubin Observatory needs people like you who have a combination of machine learning skills, software engineering skills, science domain knowledge to find the patterns in the data that nobody else can find. And so treasure waits in the Rubin data set if you can find it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for a couple questions. The first one is from Adikan. How much does the proliferation of satellites like Starlink affect the observations you've been able or will be able to make? Has the observatory team had to adapt in new ways to correct for these effects?
Okay, so we expect with the proliferation of low Earth orbit satellites that less than 2% of the pixels will be impacted, which means that We can account for this by just running LSST 2% longer. Satellites have been around for a long time, and we have algorithms that automatically detect streaks and mask them, so they're excluded from the COADs. Now, like, just because satellites won't impact Rubin Observatory doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a registry for low Earth orbit satellites and start tracking them better and do something about that. So those are two separate things.
Thank you. The next question is from Max Grover. How do you balance being an NSF and DOE project? What are the pros and cons of data management and cybersecurity policies of each organization?
Okay, so okay, I'm not supposed to talk about money. So yeah, having two funding agencies right now has given us a little bit of insurance in these times, which is good. They do have different security requirements. The security requirements didn't necessarily come from the funding agencies themselves. So I will say the one thing, we would love to be able to use cloud for our data facility. And that decision the decision of choosing Slack wasn't necessarily a technical one, and is something that our funding agencies decide for us.
Got it. I think we have time for one more question from Eric Ma. I'm curious to hear, with code vestiges that aren't used much, in what ways does that induce a maintenance burden, and what examples are there? What might off-ramping paths for that code look like?
There was a sentence in there that I didn't catch. What does the maintenance burden look like?
Yeah, like with code vestiges that aren't used much, in what ways does that induce a maintenance burden, and what examples are there? Okay.
So one example is that we have a class that holds our point spread function models, and there's an abstract base class and then various implementations of the modeling code. And the parameters for evaluating the PSFs have been position, because PSFs are spatially varying, and also color, because we know PSFs are color dependent as well. However, our PSF models still they're still not chromatic, and they still don't have a color component. So we've been carrying around this color parameter for years, even though we haven't used it.
Thank you so much.